All right, I probably don't need this given we're all closely set up. Anyway, so this is our drop-in session engagement opportunity on the Willaston Cemetery Masterplan. We've got Phillips Pilkington Architects who prepared the masterplan, the draft masterplan, who will walk you through it. There's obviously an online audience and it's been recorded for those who don't have time to attend tonight. It's been a project that's gone on for 9 months now, I guess. And it's important that we do this work. One of the things is that we don't have a list of priorities in terms of how we invest in the cemetery. So that's the purpose of the master plan. But with that in mind, I will hand over to our consultants and they can introduce themselves and they can do the welcome to country. So thank you.
Do you want the microphone or? Yeah. All right. Sure. Okay. Thanks, Andrew. So I'm Tom from Phillips Pilkington Architects, and Sue, my director as well here, to go through the draft Willaston Cemetery Master Plan. So just first of all, a quick acknowledgement that we are working, living, and learning on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. Willaston Cemetery is also located on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, recognise their continuing spiritual connection to lands and waters around Adelaide. So thank you to everyone who's here and everyone who's online. To get started, it thought it was worth just quickly touching on why we are here, talking about a master plan for Willaston Cemetery. So it's a pretty brief timeline. Obviously, there's a lot more that happens in 160 years than just a few things, but obviously 1866, the cemetery was established. The plan there is essentially the first plan of the cemetery, giving the layout of the cemetery with the roadways and burial plots and the surrounding reserve. Then we move through time, 1943, the cemetery changed slightly. There was some land that was taken from the reserve and turned into burial areas. Some of that is there today. Thankfully, not all of that was taken for burials. And then we move into the 2000s with first of all, the State Heritage listing, which I think was 2001, which is a pretty significant event for the cemetery. The preparation of the first conservation management plan by McDougall and Vines, which set in place a few things that have happened at the cemetery in the last 20 to 25 years. And then a couple of years ago, we were engaged by Gawler Council to develop an updated conservation management plan, which is the cover there. So that's kind of where we come from. There's a bit of a brief history of the cemetery, but we're really here tonight to talk about what sort of comes next. What's the future for the cemetery? How do we sort of take all the good bits of that history and the heritage and everything that's there and preserve those for future generations, for future ongoing use and maintaining it as a really valuable asset for the community in Gawler. What will the master plan address? And I guess also equally as importantly, what won't we be addressing necessarily as part of the master plan? So this is the original brief we were given when we started the master plan project, so from the council. So I won't read through all of those items there, but you can get a sense for what we're looking at. So it's an active cemetery, so we need to be mindful of that in what we're proposing as part of the master plan. So maintaining burial capacity, looking at different types of burials, trends in burials, where we can accommodate new burials and potentially reuse into the future, although that's sort of slightly beyond the scope of the master plan. There's a whole lot of landscape that's part of the master plan, including sugar gums, trees, maintaining and developing the landscape within the cemetery, traffic circulation, pedestrian access are important, and then also just things like infrastructure that's on the site, bins, seats, shade, water, power where we need it, all those sorts of things that make a place comfortable and friendly for visitors. There's also wayfinding signage as well that we'll touch on as we go through the master plan. What isn't the master plan addressing? So in the conservation management plan, there's a whole series of policies that we developed for the cemetery. The master plan addresses some of those policies, but it doesn't address all of them. So things like a conservation and management of memorials on the site is not something that we're necessarily looking at as part of the master plan. So we're not looking at how burial sites might be reused. That's captured within the conservation management plan. And other items that we aren't necessarily looking at. I can't think of anything else really off the top of my head. But there are a large number of policies within that conservation management plan that aren't necessarily tied to the master plan. So it's just important to acknowledge that at this point. So as Andrew mentioned, we've been in this process of developing the master plan for a number of months, I think about 9 months or so, since we first started the process. And in that time, we've had a number of meetings with the council. We've had a consultation workshop with some of the key stakeholders in the cemetery, so the Friends of the Cemetery, staff from council as well, members from the community such as from the RSL and Trees for Life, who are all active in the cemetery. So we had a workshop with them. We've also had some other meetings with them as we've developed the master plan. The outcomes of some of those meetings, for example, in the workshop, one of the activities we did was getting people to think about how they imagine the cemetery in the future. They wrote down some key words of sort of their vision for the future of the cemetery, and out of that comes this word cloud, which is useful to us because we can get an idea for what are the important aspects of the cemetery, the things that people really value, so community, family, access, it's a place for visitors. The other things that came out of those workshops were also the importance of the history of the cemetery, and it's a place that is kind of valued by the community in lots of different ways as well. So it's obviously a place for memorial and remembrance, and we need to be respectful of that, but it's also a place that people go to enjoy the environment of the cemetery. They go to learn about the history of Gawler and other things like that. So there's lots of ways that it is important to the community. The other thing we've done is site analysis. So going to the site, spending time there, looking at what sort of works on the site, what doesn't work, what can be improved, where the opportunities are to enhance what's there, what some of the sort of issues are on the site as well. We develop site plans from that. We identify where things are, where the key bits of infrastructure are, where the paths are, the roadways, where the burials are, and start to develop a sort of picture of the cemetery as it is now. So just a bit of a collage of some of that there. Probably not the most flattering photos of the cemetery there, but starting to look at some of the things that we hopefully can address, such as pathways, stormwater management, the signage, the spoil bin as you come into the cemetery at the main entry, the gates, the toilets, bins, all those little things that add up to making a cemetery perhaps not quite as inviting as it could be. The other thing we've looked at is a little bit of data analysis on burials on the site. The kind of really obvious thing from this graph, which is only up to 2024, but you kind of get the picture that in the light blue is sort of more traditional burials. Up until about 2000, it was almost all burials. There's a few sort of cremated or inurnments in there, but not many. And then around about 2000, you start to see the cremated burials pick up and the traditional burials drop. So there's changes in the way the cemetery is being used over time as well. So the data we've got for 2023 and 2024, you can see about half of the burials are cremations and half of them are more traditional burials. So that's something we've kept in mind as well as we've developed the master plan. Yeah. Yes, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so we did get some data from the council on the last 214 burials, which I imagine is, I don't know, the last 4 or 5 years maybe, of burials. Of those, 131 are in the lawn area, 67 are in the other areas in the cemetery. And then below that, 86 of those in the lawn area are new sites. So the remaining burials in the lawn area were reuse of existing sites, so probably family members being buried in the same plot. And then only 15 of the 67 burials in the rest of the cemetery were new sites. So in the wider cemetery, predominantly it's reuse or reopening of grave sites. So as with the lawn area, most likely families, family members being buried in the same plot as their ancestors. But there is a significant preference, I guess, in the lawn area, which is worth noting, as that lawn area has been a topic of conversation as we've done the consultation over the last few months. I don't know if we probably don't need to go into the factors for that tonight, but there are lots of sort of reasons why that might be, and I guess important to note that that's has been an important consideration in the master plan that we'll present tonight. So site analysis from there, we've developed a kind of vision and guiding principles for the site. So the vision statement as part of the master plan, Willaston Cemetery is a place for memorial and reflection where the community can honour its history, is a place that welcomes all visitors and provides a sanctuary for the deceased and the bereaved who remember them. So trying to capture the sort of, I guess, essence of the consultation and feedback we got from that consultation, and other conversations we've had around the master plan, that the history and the sense of respect and remembrance memorial is really critical to the cemetery. But as we've said there, it welcomes all visitors, so it is more than just a place where people go to bury their dead. It's a place for people to learn about the history. People go there to walk their dogs and you know, look after the landscape as well. So there's multiple facets to the cemetery. We want to try and...
One of the few bits of remnant vegetation. So it was identified in the first conservation plan back in 2004 as contributing significantly to the state heritage listing.
Yes, yeah, so an important part of the site. So the vision statement really sort of guides everything that the master plan sets out. It also acts as a kind of main principle for future works at the site. So if, say, one of these stages of the master plan is developed further, whoever does that work is coming back to this vision in how they develop that work in the future. So from that, we've outlined 5 guiding principles for work at the site and for the master plan, which build on that vision statement. So honouring the history of the cemetery and telling its stories is number 1. Respecting the sanctity of the cemetery and its role within the community. Balancing the need for quiet contemplation with the cemetery's value as a public space. Protect and enhance the ecosystem of the cemetery and promote its environmental value. So that's mainly around that perimeter vegetation. And number 5, ensuring the cemetery can remain in use and support its financial sustainability into the future. So again, principles that anyone doing future work at the site can come back to and make sure that what they're doing fits in with what we outline here. We've then developed a more detailed brief for the master plan. So taking what we were initially given by the council, taking the consultation and site analysis that we've done, looking at the vision and guiding principles that we've developed and sort of turning that into a more detailed, in-depth set of items that we feel address the needs and the opportunities at the site, as well as fitting in with the vision and principles there. So some of these items match what we were given, some of them build on that, some of them are slightly different, but the key things are burial capacity and types of burials. And we've noted there as well the relevant policies from the Conservation Management Plan. So burial capacity, types of burials, sugar gums and new trees, cemetery landscape, pedestrian and vehicle movement, stormwater management, entrance upgrades, native remnant vegetation, site infrastructure and amenity, signage and interpretation, and noise management as sort of the key items on the site that the master plan addresses. So next steps, we're starting to look at the site as a whole and come up with some guiding strategies or site-wide strategies that help provide a framework for how we identify where we target our master plan proposals. So the first strategy that we've looked at is looking at focal points within the site. So there are some obvious points within the site, the main entry and that central circle, but at the moment on the site there's not really much beyond those 2 areas that gives you too much in the way of a focal point or a destination within the site. So we've looked at how we can enhance that in keeping with the current layout of the site, the way the site's used, what's there at the moment, and the other points we've identified at the 4 corners, or the other 3 corners, the eastern, western and and corners. Then also within the site, between those points and the centre of the cemetery, some other sort of key nodes that we can start to develop as sort of interim spaces between the outside and the middle of the site. So at the moment there's lots of shade in the middle, there's lots of shade on the outside, but there's not really much in between. So these developing some spaces there that provide shade and shelter and seating and things like that, and in a way that enhances and builds on the current historical layout of the site. The next strategy was around traffic and pedestrian movement, so people and vehicles. So at the moment at the cemetery, basically anyone can drive in and drive wherever they like and more or less park wherever they like, which probably works to a certain extent, but does cause some issues with, it's not really clear where you can and can't park. So there are some areas on the site that are sort of clear dirt areas where there are actually burials that people are parking on, which is a problem. There's also some grave sites quite close to those spaces where people are parking, so there's a risk of damage to existing sites. And it's not just a matter of respect, it's also a risk, a health and safety risk. If a grave collapses with a car on it, then that's obviously going to cause some issues. So we want to try and manage that aspect of it. But we also want to make the cemetery a more pleasant experience for people generally, so people who are walking through the site as well, and enhance the visitor experience of the site. So the diagram basically shows in the red pedestrian access pathways, and in the blue is vehicle access pathways. So we're not proposing that cars can't enter the site. We acknowledge that that's an important part of the way the site's used, so public will still be able to drive in and access the site as they always have. We are proposing though that we adjust the access into the main entry, so having a new main vehicle access point off Cemetery Road rather than at the moment you can either enter off Cemetery Road or go through the main gates. So we have one access point there, and then have where the blue parts are highlighted, have those as vehicle roadways with some parking, designated parking areas along those roadways, as I mentioned, to make it safer really for people driving into the site. But we're also still providing access pretty well to every aisle in the cemetery by car. The other thing to note on here is that the main north-south axis we're proposing is a kind of shared pedestrian vehicle zone. It's a kind of ceremonial roadway. So on occasions where there's a funeral procession coming into the cemetery, that might enter through the main gates and proceed up the centre of the cemetery and then go to wherever that burial is taking place from there. But primarily that would be a pedestrian access pathway. The third strategy that we looked at, and I think that was the last one we had, was this idea of connecting the landscape in the cemetery. So at the moment, like I mentioned before, there's a nice green space at the centre of the cemetery. There's the native vegetation around the outside of the cemetery, but in between there's not really much there. So what we'd like to do is link those two quite separate green spaces with more planting within the cemetery and focusing on those main axes, so the east, west and north, south, with new planting with trees, so that we can connect the outside landscape with the centre of the cemetery. And also looking at how the southwest and southeast sides of the cemetery might start to be rewilded, I guess, in a way that tries to re-establish a sense of what was there previously. So those sections were part of the native vegetation reserve. They were taken for burials, so there's an opportunity there to re-establish some landscaping and greenery in those spaces as well. Now we start to look at the master plan itself. So I won't spend too long on this diagram. This is an overall site plan that basically captures everything that we've developed within the master plan. So all of the stages all captured in one drawing at the same time. So the roadways are redeveloped, the pathways are redeveloped. There's some new landscaping, the main entries redeveloped as well, and there's some shelters and structures around at the corners of the cemetery. But we'll go into that in more detail as we start to look at each stage and the more detailed plans as well. So in terms of staging, through the consultation with council and the Friends and other stakeholders, we I guess started to get a sense for what the priorities were at the site. Through the site analysis, we developed our own ideas about what we thought was more important or needed to be done more quickly or addressed more urgently in the site. And one thing that I haven't really mentioned yet as well is that we do have a bigger consultant team that's part of this process also, so landscape architects, civil engineers, traffic engineers, and cost consultants who are all sort of part of this conversation as well. So they also have their own, I guess, views on how things could or should develop over time. So with all that in mind, we've developed, I think, 15 stages here. Stage 15, the last stage, which isn't on this diagram, is around noise management, but we might touch on that towards the end maybe, as it's a sort of slightly separate issue from where we are in terms of the master plan at the moment. So I'll quickly go through the stages that we've identified. Important to note that this is the draft master plan, so this staging may not necessarily reflect everyone's idea of how things should develop at the site, what the priorities should be.
And there's an opportunity for you to contribute to that. So you might, once you've heard what the proposed stages are, either give us feedback today or give us feedback through the ongoing consultation process. So it is, as Tom says, draft. Nothing is fixed in place, and there's an opportunity for your views to be integrated into the final master plan.
Yes. So these stages, it's worth noting we've kind of got a 10-year time frame that we're looking at as well. So we're imagining these stages occur over that period. So from stage 1, which might be next year, say, all the way to the last stage, which could be in 10 years, give or take. So the first few stages really are mostly focused around the main entry area. So stage one we've got there is relocate the spoil bin from the main entry to the western corner. So there's a space there that we've identified that's suitable for that. And that gets that out of the way. Stage two is upgrades to the main entry. So some landscaping, there's a new shelter there and the new driveway coming into the cemetery. Stage three is tied to that with parking along Cemetery Road. Stage 4 and 5 could probably be swapped, or one or the other. We've got there as stage 4 the northern part of the central avenue. So there were some trees there that were recently removed. It's sort of in need of a bit of work, so we've identified that as a potential early stage. And then stage 5 is new toilets at the main entry. So we've separated that from the main entry. Upgrades, mainly looking at what's feasible in sort of bite-sized chunks, but that could sort of be shifted around a bit. The next one we've got there is landscape, signage, acoustic and infrastructure works. So there's a whole lot of sort of little bits and pieces around the site that could be tackled almost at any time. So there's things like planting garden beds and things in the site that could be done, or could be started straight away and might evolve over time, over the course of the master plan. Things like signage, wayfinding, some of that can be integrated with the stages as they develop, but some of that can be tackled earlier. So things like row markers, that might be a whole separate project that gets done as a package. The acoustic aspect of that is potentially engaging acoustic engineering. So we did look at this as part of the master plan, but the funds weren't there to engage a specialist consultant to look at that. So it's engaging someone to look at the issue of the noise from Sturt Highway, which we know is just getting busier and busier, and the impact on the site is going to continue to grow. It has been an issue that's been flagged as something important to the community and having a significant negative impact on the site. But again, that cost to get the specialist advice around that is kind of a separate bit of work that the council will need to do. And then there's a whole other part of that, which is how you actually then deal with the issue with noise barriers and the like, which is a conversation that the council's aware of and having, but it is a complex issue. So put that to the side, then go into the next lot of stages, which are sort of the medium-term stages, I guess. So stage 6 to 9. So that might be 4, 5, 6, 7 years. So stage 6 we've identified as developing that new garden area in the south west of the cemetery as a kind of inurnment and memorial area. So there are some grave sites there at the moment that are marked, which would be incorporated into that development. But the primary focus of that is providing a additional capacity for cremated burials in the cemetery, and an alternative to things like the rose gardens and the columbarium at the centre of the cemetery. Stage 7 eastern entry, 8 is the east-west roadway, 9 is the southern part of that north-south axis, so completing that central avenue. Stage 10, pedestrian path upgrades, so really just paving and some landscaping to those pathways. 11 is and we're starting to look at probably the longer term stages as well, so 8 to 10 years probably. The northern corner of the cemetery, stage 12, the centre of the cemetery, stage 13, the secondary east-west roadways, vehicle access roadways, and stage 14, sort of much longer term, the perimeter roadways. So now, looking in more detail at some of the areas of the master plan, there's a sort of series of plans that we've developed for different parts of the cemetery. The important thing to note, I guess, with these plans is that we haven't drawn plans, detailed plans for each stage of the cemetery. So some of the stages cover, almost the whole site. So it's really hard to sort of focus in on the details of those items. So instead of doing that, we've looked at particular key parts of the cemetery, but they do cover multiple stages within those more detailed plans. So if we look at the main entry, for example, the numbers on the plan which relate to the key or the legend on the side, the number relates to the stage that particular part of the plan might happen in, and then the letter is related to the key and the description of what that is. So, for example, the main entry area, so this is, I guess, a concept of what we think this area could look like at the completion of the master plan. Once all of the work that we've identified is done. But we've got stage 1, so 1A there is the red dashed line is moving the spoil bin, moving that to the western corner of the site. The items that are identified as number 2 are part of stage 2. So there's the new shelter there. There's some landscaping around the main gates. Probably the most significant bit of work around stage 2 is the entryway. So we've talked about having the driveway off Cemetery Road, but we're also looking at how we reconfigure that corner with Cemetery Road and Dawkins Avenue so that we essentially re-establish the straight line from that corner all the way through the cemetery to the centre of the cemetery and then to the northern corner of the cemetery. And making the gates really the centrepiece of that entranceway in as well. There is an issue at the moment with the width of those gates, so there is some damage that's occurred from vehicles going through those gates. So part of the reason for having the alternative driveway is to restrict vehicle access through the main entry gates. We think that it's valid to make those for sort of ceremonial use only, otherwise they're pedestrian access. So we've got some bollards there to restrict access. And then the landscaping around the gates, so that circular space which mirrors the circle at the centre of the cemetery with a clear area of lawn around the gates, again making them the centrepiece, trees planted there, and then some landscaping and seating. So stage 3 is the car parking, and then we've got stage 5 on here, which is the new toilets. So we've got a shelter on one side, which will have some seating, some signage, some interpretive materials, talking about the history of the site, etc., as well as a map and information about how to find your way around the cemetery. And then the toilets on the other side, again with some shelter, but with those facilities there.
And can I just say with that shelter space that the idea, groups who are going on tours of the cemetery, it's a place to congregate in the shade and then enter, so that there's an opportunity for them to get an introduction to the cemetery before they're within it.
Yeah, and it could be school groups, it could be family groups maybe that are meeting at the cemetery. It just provides a bit more shelter and shade and amenity at that key point in the site. Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if you're aware, there's quite often now, especially the weekend, there's picnics there that people celebrate. And now that the area in the centre is getting a lot, it's difficult to hold it there, and especially other cultures. So is there going to be somewhere that can be addressed?
So you mean family groups or groups of people getting together to commemorate a loved one or something like that?
Yeah, a birthday.
Yeah.
I don't know if I should
so
say this.
You know, they've got a loved one in the cemetery that's
Yeah,
got a birthday or something that.
Yeah, and a lot of cultures do it, and it's more and more.
Yeah.
So if you go up there every weekend, there's nearly always at
Yeah.
least one.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. I mean, so the thing that has come up.
As I said, it's usually on the lawn where, you know,
In the middle,
niche
yeah.
bulb is, but that's getting quite full, and it's a bit difficult.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to the fact that that's really the only place in the cemetery at the moment where there is shade and shelter, and it's sort of quiet and cool, and you can do that. That it is a kind of a place that people are drawn to when you're on the site. So the thing that has come up in the consultation previously is particular times of year when it gets busier. So Mother's Day, Easter, those sorts of times where people the site might be more busy, but that particular comment about people going there to celebrate a birthday or milestone hasn't come up, so that's useful to know. But that, you know, this kind of space is really the idea is that it does help accommodate some of that happening. So it's another space that I guess provides the shelter, a bit of lawn, some seating that accommodates those groups to gather at the site.
And Tom, there are also, which you'll see as we go through, that there's some other spaces that have been created. So there will be a range of spaces that people can choose to use, which our plans will show. Whether there's enough is another question.
Yeah, we'll have to talk to Andrew about the budget, maybe that one. How many barbecues can we afford? But I mean, and the other thing on that as well is, you know, those people are bringing food and things as well with them, I guess, so they need to have bins and bits and pieces to put their rubbish and all that sort of thing. So they're the sorts of things that we're aiming to address as part of this process. So the next plan we had up there is that western corner. So we've talked about the spoil bin being relocated from the main entry up into the western corner. So there's a at the end of those roadways where that can be accommodated, and the council vehicles and things can still access that. We want to try and conceal the spoil bin a little bit when we do move it. So we're looking at providing some screening around that concrete structure, which might be a more organic shape. It might be a material like rusted steel or something that blends in with the landscape a bit more. It also provides an opportunity for some graphics or artwork or interpretation as well that might tell a little bit of the story of the cemetery. Might include some of the history or stories about the people on the site or the way the cemetery's developed over time. There's also some landscaping there that we can, when we relocate in, we can bring some of the native vegetation into that space around a new pathway, include some seating as well, you know, in the shade. So there's kind of a spot there at that corner where people might be able to get some rest and respite. There's also some other landscaping that we've identified around some of the grave sites there in those corners. The trees, at the moment, there's the sugar gums along that roadway, the diagonal roadway. The long-term plan is that they are removed, so some of them are kind of already showing signs of ill health. They need management anyway, so that and there are detrimental, or they are detrimental to the health of the site. So the plan is to remove those and replace them with an alternative tree. At the moment, what we've identified is I can't remember the scientific name, the mallee trees that are endemic to the site. Could be a good replacement for those. So they're not quite as large as the sugar gums, but still provide good shade and cover, and would be suitable. Yeah, another question?
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm glad to raise that point because I remember one other time, it was a few years ago, that you gave a report to council, and it highlighted the point that those sugar gums shouldn't be there because of the mess they make, and they really are not the sort of tree that should be there. And it's also indicated in all the information that is here. Because I recall a long time ago when they were planted, it was planted by a service club that decided they were a good tree to plant for shade. And one of the fellas was a farmer, and a lot of farmers in the Northern Territory planted them down their driveway and then cut them back to around about 3 or 4 metres, and they shot out beautifully as, you know, so maybe not to remove them totally, but to cut the wood down. And considering wood at the moment for fires is $550 a tonne, there's a lot of money there.
Could help pay for the
but the mess that's made in that cemetery, especially in that southwest northern area, it's unbelievable. People are going up there with steam cleaners and blowers and everything and just blowing it back, but then when the wind comes, it blows it back in. Yeah. So I'm just wondering, you know, where we're at with that removal or cutting them back, pruning them back. One other question while I've got the mic is, I noticed in the introduction when you started there, it said for First Nations people, a special place. We now have one of our other cemeteries which has a special First Nation cemetery, which is out, you know, on the southern side. Is that still relevant in this particular plan?
So part of so on the trees, on the sugar gums, we have outlined in the conservation management plan some detailed policies around managing those, and there's kind of two parts to that. There's the sugar gums in the native vegetation area around the cemetery that is one issue, and that's probably well, the issue there is that they're outcompeting the endemic native vegetation and having a pretty detrimental impact on that area. So they, in order to support the native vegetation, they need to really be removed completely, and the calitris and the mallee and the other trees in that area can then regrow. So that's one part of it. The sugar gums within the cemetery itself, so you talked about pruning and things like that. That could be one management strategy, maybe in the shorter term, to I guess help one with the aesthetic issues around the canopy, also too maybe the leaf litter and things that come from those. If they're smaller, that might help. But they are also, things like the roots and all that sort of stuff does have an impact on the grave sites. And they are, as with in the native vegetation, they're not a endemic species to the site. So the long-term plan, in order to support the environmental health of the whole site, is to remove all of the sugar gums from the cemetery and replace them, ideally with a more local species like the mallee box, which is not quite as large, still provides some shade and cover, but possibly we'll still have some issues with leaf litter and bark and things like that. But I think it's a bit of a balancing act. You're never going to completely remove that as an issue unless you just get rid of all the trees altogether. So I guess there's kind of in order to get the shade and the aesthetic benefits of vegetation of the trees, you kind of got a bit of a trade-off there with potentially having to manage a bit of leaf litter and things like that. But does that sort of answer that a little bit? I can't really talk about timeframes and all those sorts of things. It's kind of with the council at the moment, so Andrew, the team might be better placed to talk about that. But that's that one. The other one, the First Nations side of it, part of the conservation management plan, we did identify potentially there's room for some engagement with the local Kaurna community around the site. So given it is one of the last remaining bits of, well, the main reason being it's the native vegetation area, it's like one of the last remaining bits of native vegetation, there's some opportunity there to engage with them around the management of that and involvement in that side of it. There's also the potential that there are, well, there almost certainly are First Nations people buried at the site. We haven't gone through a process of identifying them. It's probably not appropriate really to do that, but there might be some way of engaging with that community from that aspect. It was noted in the brief for the master plan as a potential area of engagement for us, but we haven't really pursued that. Council, I think, have looked at doing that, but I don't think there's been a lot of traction there from the community. It's not necessarily a really significant place for them, I guess, in the context of Gawler, and so that hasn't really eventuated. It might do into the future, but I guess there are other ways that that's been done in Gawler by the sounds of it, so that's good to know. Yeah.
It does briefly say something about the pencil pines as well.
Yeah, so we can get to that one. I probably don't need to spend any more time on that plan. If I'm looking at the northern area, so developing a gathering space in the kind of more or less existing clearing space there. There's a new gateway shelter into the site as well.
On the issue of the pencil pines,
Yeah.
everything that's gone on in that cemetery is not always been documented,
Yep.
and under some of those pencil pines is ashes.
Okay.
Not everyone can afford to pay to put ashes there, so there's ashes dotted around that cemetery.
Yep.
As there is graves that's not been gone through the channels. I'm sure you know.
So unrecorded burials then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some
okay.
of them are quite under the trees, are really, really quite recent.
Okay.
So just be aware.
Yeah, and would they be in urns that people have buried the urn in the space, or are people scattering ashes? Both. Okay.
You know, burials are an expensive thing and not everyone can afford it.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'll talk to you about afterwards.
Yeah, well,
Original burials there.
about...
I'll talk to you later about that.
Yeah, sure, that would be good. So I've been a couple of things on that then. I guess what we can do in the master plan is acknowledge those aspects in the master plan and highlight the fact that any work that happens on the site needs to be mindful of potentially coming across unexpected burials or items or remains. So
Those suicide burials who were buried outside the consecrated ground. I've been going to that cemetery since I was about 4. My grandfather was contracted with the Gawler Council, and he kept it tidy. So you're aware that people who suicided couldn't be buried within the cemetery?
I don't think that's come up in a lot of detail previously in the
Well, it's every
consultation, but
cemetery. Some half in, some are half out. So there's some there that are not buried in the cemetery. I used to put flowers on them.
So when you say not in the cemetery, do you mean in the sort of vegetation area around the cemetery?
So you need to be aware of that as well.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, no, that's good. It's good to know. So I guess what the other thing I was going to say about in terms of costs and things like that, it might be another conversation we can have with the council in terms of the master plan, but maybe there is a way that we can create some space or a place where that can be accommodated in a more effective way, I guess. So I imagine from my own personal view, the last thing I want is for people in society to be, having to, go around the rules and bury their loved ones in a way that's, secret or clandestine or hidden or whatever. And I'm sure the council.
Suicides, or you weren't.
Well, that's a different issue, a different historical issue. But so the issue of people burying their loved ones under the ashes under a tree, sort of in secret, to me that doesn't seem right. And I'm sure the council's view is that that's probably not right either. So maybe that's a conversation we have. And I mean, it from a practical point of view, we don't want to keep creating this issue that if things are being done at the cemetery, so the roadways need replacing or some trees need replacing, the last thing you want is a contractor to go to the site and accidentally dig up some remains. So there's a practical aspect to it as well. So it's probably something we can look at, how we include some sort of strategy within the master plan or the site to help deal with that. But probably not an easy issue to address or resolve. But the burials in the suicide burials in the sort of vegetation area around the cemetery is another issue again. The master plan doesn't really look at that area in terms of new works in the surrounding area in a lot of detail, other than at the four corners. So if you do have any idea about where those areas are, that might be something worthwhile. But again, it might be also something that can be acknowledged, or some sort of memorial created, or something as well, given it's probably a slightly darker part of our collective history, the way that those things were dealt with in the past. And I mean, just going back, this plan, sorry.
Yeah, good evening, Richard Tucker. Local Bush for Life site carers. I live in Chamberlain Road. So my main interest is obviously the remnant vegetation, and I think most of what I've read in the plan is pretty complementary to the remnant bush sites, and augments them in many areas. Obviously, the removal of sugar gums will create a changed habitat for some of the wildlife over time, and also probably quite a big visual impact, because those sugar gums do create quite a visual impact. Just what my main point was that you've mentioned Trees for Life, who manage in part the 4 sites around the perimeter, and in reading through the whole plan, there was actually no reference to Bush for Life or them being existing sites or trees for life, the only mention is a list of signage, existing signage. So I was just wondering, I was concerned as to how much consultation there might have been with Trees for Life or on anything to do with the remnant vegetation.
Apologies for not, being fully across Bush for Life and Trees for Life and how that all kind of fits together and in context of the cemetery. Adrian Shackley has been involved in a lot of the conversations we've had previously, so I think he wears quite a few hats, and I think has been involved in either Bush for Life or Trees for Life in various ways. So he's had a fair bit of input into the native vegetation side of things, so helping us with the lists of endemic species or local species that we've included in the appendix, the master plan, helping with conversations around appropriate trees for different parts of the cemetery, those sorts of things, and in terms of acknowledging the various different groups that are involved, we can update the report, make sure we acknowledge Bush for Life and Trees for Life as well, but then also, I guess importantly, how you fit into the ongoing management of the site and development of the master plan over time. So it might be a good bit of feedback that if you can provide more detail around how you see that happening into the future, what parts of the master plan your group can contribute to and be involved in, that would be fantastic, so that we can capture that in here.
Sure, I'm just a volunteer member.
Yeah,
I'm not one of the paid staff, but I've been site caring there for probably a couple of decades, probably overall. You mentioned Adrian Shackley. I know him pretty well through other environmental things. So that's all good. Yeah. Just my other question was, on one of the plans here, it mentions about reclaiming reserve. Is that the wide verges on Chamberlain and Dawkins Avenue? Are they going to be brought into the site, or is that?
So if I go right back, the overall strategy for the site in terms of landscape is to try and reconnect and get more greenery into the cemetery, essentially, is the main goal. Part of that is the southeast and southwestern parts of the cemetery that were vegetation reserve, that were commandeered for burial sites in the 40s, have been cleared. They're now pretty barren. There's obviously burials there, which we need to maintain, but so the orange shaded area, the idea is to, if we can, start bringing in some planting and vegetation into those areas. So establishing that line of trees along that boundary, what would have been the edge of the cemetery, as potentially mallee box trees along that line to re-establish that boundary, and then probably starting with those corner spaces at the ends of rows, bringing in some native vegetation there, and then potentially where we can, other grasses and things into that space, so it becomes more of a part cemetery, part green native vegetation space.
Yeah, no, I see that. I think that's a good idea, but it was just my interpretation of what was on one of the plans was there's a wide sort of verge along Chamberlain Road and Dawkins Avenue, so there's no plan to incorporate those out to the roadside or
no, at this stage, no, we're not looking at anything beyond the current sort of fence line of that vegetation. So, it's all within on the inside of the cemetery, really, and the master plan itself, we're not really looking too much at that native vegetation area. So there's a lot in the conservation management plan about the and about helping support that native vegetation through weed management and those sorts of things. But in terms of the master plan, I guess our perspective on is that we want to do as little as we can or as little as possible in that space to preserve what's there essentially, and not do any more damage than it's already been done.
Yeah, sure. Just one other point. I'm glad that the noise mitigation idea has got this far. I think I first raised it at the conservation plan meeting some years ago.
Yeah.
I think that's something that could be incorporated into that western side of the Bush for Life site. I just hope it happens within my lifetime so I can, my family can enjoy it after I've gone. Thank you.
Yes, yeah. It is a complex issue, but it is a conversation that's been started. We have looked at engaging the relevant consultants to look into it in more detail. That's something council will need to pick up into the future, but yeah, it's an ongoing conversation. I'm just conscious of time, so...
Can I just make one comment that in the conservation management plan, we had Peter Tucker, an environmental consultant, looking at the perimeter, and that informed a lot of the policies within the conservation management plan. So there's more in that than there is in the master plan.
Yeah, there's a lot more detail on native vegetation in the conservation management plan. But I guess in terms of the master plan, we've tried to do what we can within the cemetery to help support what's there and not do more damage, but it is kind of more covered by the conservation management plan. So I guess just conscious of time, quickly to go through some of the other plans. So at the eastern corner, looking at some more shelter at that entry point and some seating there as well, and an opportunity for signage and wayfinding interpretation there. A lot of the same landscaping and roadway treatments. This is looking at one of those intersection points, focal points that we identified with the north-south pedestrian avenue. So you talked about the pencil pines that are there. One of the proposals was to look at how we redevelop that avenue of planting through the centre of the cemetery. A lot of the pencil pines are not there anymore. A lot of them are kind of, not in the best shape. There's issues with salinity and water management and things like that as well that have impacted their health. So probably in the long term they will be replaced eventually. So we're looking at re-establishing that avenue with the native pines rather than a non-native species. But we note that there are potential burials there. Again, another one of those focal points, those intersections, and then the east-west roadway where we've proposed about 30 parallel parking spaces along that roadway to accommodate within the site. There's a big funeral or event on, most people will be able to park there and then make their way to the site, but then there's also other parking opportunities around the site for people to get closer to the grave site, or if there's more cars than can be accommodated here. Central space, so repaving, some new garden beds at the points where the roadways meet the central roundabout, and then at the very centre, I think there's an opportunity for some sort of or artwork or interpretive element that provides a real focal point for the centre of the cemetery, and then more seating there as well. So at the moment there's a couple of benches. We think we can provide a bit more than that around the centre of the cemetery. The garden area there, that we're imagining is a kind of an extension of what's already there with the Precious Souls and Babies garden, so the same sort of native vegetation, low planting, a little bit more informal, so meandering pathways, and then opportunities for seating, for edges to the pathway, accommodate plaques, and as well, similar to the Precious Souls Babies garden. Interpretation signage, so some ideas there of what that might look like, so some precedents. So it's robust materials, finishes and colours that tie in with the what's there already, the red clay, dirt. They weather over time as well, reflecting the time spans of the set and the history that's already there. And that's the end. So QR code, Your Voice site, I'm sure you've already probably found that already. There's a survey there that you can, we'd love you, everyone to be taking your comments and questions, feeding those back into the final master plan, which we're looking at presenting to council meeting. So the consultation period runs till the end of June, 26th, I think, of June was the end of the consultation period. So I'm sure Andrew would love to, with all your comments, thoughts, questions about the cemetery, and he'd be happy to pass those on to us. And I guess if there are any other questions or comments or final thoughts.
So did you meet? Myself, President.
Yeah. Okay. I can't remember. Ryan? Oh, maybe, yes. Yeah. I think that's all. Yes. No. So I mean, I don't know the exact connection. That workshop, December, I think. Friends was there with his Trees for Life and guitar hat on, and there was a couple of others, including Wayne, who mentioned he was part of the EFL, so I don't know if
we basically use the Friends as a focus group for us, and along the way, as was indicated, there are groups there are individuals who have multiple hats. We've had Taylor and Forgy, for example. Obviously, they're part of the Friends, but they're also part of the industry, if you like, giving lots of forthright advice, which is fine. And we've had, I think we've had Mr. Shackley himself attend at least a couple of sessions. So he's GIHA, I think, amongst other things.
Yes.
The Environment Centre. And the RSL, admittedly one person, but I mean, I guess that's a focus group for us to test some ideas to then go to the wider market and to see what the community says via online input, which is what we're doing now. But yeah, we're always happy to get your feedback.
So, three of us went up the World War I. It's regarding the World War I graves being dismantled and got rid of. We're going to the War Graves Commission and Peter Cosgrove, who's a family member. We're going to work with them because we're horrified that it is what has been done. And now there's been some plaques put up on cement by families because they can't find, well, the graves have been lawned over. so that people are just putting up signs, etc. So we're going to look that there can be an area that they are acknowledged.
Yeah,
And it will eventually happen to World War II as well.
yeah, yeah,
Also, the records are appalling. I think that's the main thing. The records are just simply appalling.
I guess, you know, there was certainly a fair bit of feedback, wasn't there, in the Conservation and Heritage Management Plan about, I guess, data and looking at how we could manage that, you know, in terms of the accuracy of data. I think my recollection in the earlier phase of work was the council had worked quite closely with the Friends to verify elements of data, but also to talk more widely to the community. If there's data which is inaccurate, we'll be the first person to acknowledge that and try and get accuracy into that in terms of what's shown online, in terms of our databases. So we're more than happy to have that conversation and offline tonight or at other times in the near future to flag that.
Surnames there and just put nulled.
Right.
So are you, in terms of when you say data, do you mean the online
Yep.
map, interactive map that's on the website? Yeah.
Maybe turn the lights on. Maybe what we'll do offline after this conversation tonight is get your details and we can organise a catch-up or several catch-ups just to go through what's right and what's not right in the data and recommendations that may go into the master plan or through other parcels of work we need to do. There's always ongoing work at the cemetery, as you know, so we're, yep.
Several of us from the RSL. Otherwise we're going to be...
Sure. I'm happy to have a conversation and if there's opportunities to meet with a wider group of the RSL, that'd be great.
Yeah, and from our point of view in terms of the master plan, understanding, you know, what's important to the community in terms of memorial and recognition and, you know, respecting the history of the site as well, which is, you know, clearly the most important aspect, or it kind of came through in the consultation as the most important part of the site. And really the reason we're doing this, you know, if we can get some understanding about what you think is valuable in terms of recognition at the site and how we might capture that in the master plan. So if it's, you know, some memorial about World War I veterans or burials on the site, if there's memorial for World War II.
There's very few left.
But, yeah, but if there's some way we can capture that you think is going to do that justice, then we'd be more than happy to include that in the master plan. It would be, I think, an oversight if we didn't.
Different interest. I'm interested in people, plinths and artwork, ironwork doesn't interest me. My history is people. And all people, not just the rich. All people.
Yeah. And so that was one of the, eventually get there. In developing, you know, the vision and the guiding principles, that was one of the reasons why the first one was talking about honouring the history of the cemetery and telling its stories. But, you know, we're not saying that's everyone's stories. That's all of the people that are there. It's all of the you know, all the way from, you know, the founding fathers of Gawler to, you know, the people that couldn't afford a fancy gravesite. They're all equally valued and valuable stories to tell, and it's all part of the history of the site and of Gawler in you know, an equal way. So and that's part of the reason why the master plan doesn't go into the details of how to maintain or manage particular grave sites or look after particular types of stonework or those sorts of things. That's not really what the master plan is interested in. We're more interested in the overall site and how do we deal with those site-wide issues to preserve the history and those stories that are perhaps less prominent, and do them justice as much as the the John Martins and all the rest of them that are there as well. So yeah.
It's security in that, there's been cemeteries where they've had vandalism and they have
Been some things in the
vandalism.
news recently.
In Gawler, we've just had 10, where my parents and that are, someone's gone wrong and nicked all the insides of the metal, the flowers go in. My children put a submarine that he'd made and they've chiselled it off, etc. So there is becoming a bit more smaller thing. So the other thing is, I know another cemetery, they've actually put cameras on the gate. So is that ever been something?
It has been talked about, allowing for some CCTV or something at the entry. I don't know if we've got
I think it's a
final
relevant
solution there. But
Yeah, it's a relevant issue. I mean, we've talked about vandal proofing, for example, buildings because of issues with poor behaviour, I guess. And it's not a case of us trying to outcompete you in terms of what's been stolen, but we've lost taps, which sell for $5 each because they're trying to steal the brass. So there seems to be a range of outlandish behaviour at the cemetery. But I guess the management of it, some of it may be at a level which is a detail below what happens in the master plan, but it's still an issue we need to address. But I think security and how we look at assets and how we manage, I guess, being respectful of the cemetery and its history, it's important. So we'll talk about it further offline again.
yeah, but and it happens. But it's good to understand those issues. So good feedback.
Any final questions? Going. Brian, you got anything? Here we go. I knew you had one, Brian.
I think one of the things that when I go up there to see my in-laws and my mum and dad and all that sort of stuff, my brother Daryl, I walk around naturally because that's what you do when you're in a cemetery. And it really disturbs me to see some of these magnificent old headstone and graves, and it looks like they've escaped. There's big holes there and all that sort of stuff. In your experience, is there any way to be able to, sometimes people adopt a road or something. So a group of people who've got friends of the cemetery that worry about the weeds and stuff like that. But is there any projects that you've known in other places? Because recently I went up to see my daughter in Queensland, and I called into a lot of towns and went to their cemeteries. I never seen one as untidy as our cemetery. And at the moment, we're spending a lot of money doing up pathways and all this sort of stuff. But those beautiful historic graves have big holes and need repair. Is there any answers that you've experienced in time as to how we would look at that?
I think there's a couple of ways of approaching that. One is kind of a asset management point of view, which Andrew could probably talk about more, and there's obviously issues with costs and getting tradespeople and things to do all that. The Friends, they're obviously the key group at the cemetery that are interested in those aspects of the site, so there have been lots of conversations with them, more so when we're doing this around to potentially manage some of those maintenance issues. One factor that's I think perhaps a little bit different at Willaston to other cemeteries is there hasn't been, as far as I know, a lot of reuse of those older sites. So at other cemeteries, often say like West Cemetery or Cheltenham, other older historic cemeteries, those sites will get reused or released, and then those memorials, the people who take over those sites, then there's an obligation there to maintain them. So that's part of it. There's also, in terms of how it could be managed, we've talked to the CMP about council potentially having a budget, perhaps each year, a small budget that might go at, 1 or 2 sites maybe and doing some maintenance, and then there might be part of that that's also about developing skills for stonemasons and tradespeople to be able to do that, to maintain some of those skills.
I was just reflecting on your question, and it has come up before. I guess the issue from my end is if someone holds a lease on it, we really can't be doing anything on that parcel unless there's permission from the leaseholder. In a situation where it's in poor shape, poor condition, and we can't get hold of anyone, we often do reach out to the leaseholders, but if they're deceased as well and there's no next of kin, it's a good question. It probably, again, is not master plan related, but it might be back to the whole, I guess, management and processes of the cemetery itself and whether or not there should be some contingency in the budget to allow for something. But I guess it's a question of what is council's appetite to want to be in that space to do those things, because it could be quite an expensive exercise. And, we just had a conversation, a workshop last night about the budget. We've been mindful of trying to put more money into the budget to deal with things on the ground. People raise them. So one of them was getting faster approvals, for example, to get permission to bury on certain sites. So we've put money into our budget to do certain things, but it's not to say we couldn't put money in to do 2 or 3 restorations a year, but it could be $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. It could be an expensive exercise, and I wouldn't want to guesstimate the cost of it, but council has to make a decision whether it wants to be in that space, I suppose, which is a bit of a policy question.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I suppose the logistics of it, whoever owns the grave and all that sort of stuff. But I suppose I'm thinking widely about the point of adopt a grave cleanup. I mean, there's 2 up there that I could take my ute load of gravel and they'd look beautiful in half an hour. That's how easy it is. But I'm 83 years of age, so I'm an old fart now, so I don't have that sort of energy. We've got a lot of young people in our town that may look at something like that to be, a project. We adopt a tree and then it dies before the bloody developer cut it down, and what we've got we need to preserve for the future.
Yeah.
There is also opportunity. There's not a lot of money, but it is a state heritage site and therefore it's eligible for state heritage grant funding. And I think your suggestion of adopting a row of involving community groups, potentially involving local schools to have projects there, but TAFE programs where people are learning about monumental masonry as a site. Borough, for instance, has got involved in developing traditional sort of stonemasonry skills as part of restoration of some areas of old historic parts of the town that are now in ruin. So I think there are programs that you could access to begin to look after. It is, one of the challenges is it's a very large cemetery, so there's a lot to do, but anything that contributes from different programs can all help to turn it around, and because it is part of our state heritage, it deserves to be looked after.
I have to disagree with you about reusing, because there have been a lot reused. A little bit more honesty from council would go a long, long way. And again, it comes to documentation. I'm a contact person for a particular 2 names. 2 graves have been reused and I've not been contacted ever. The other thing is, I can just, for example, Merimbula Cemetery in New South Wales. That cemetery is a really large cemetery and the service clubs adopt a section. In one section where my brother-in-law was buried and he suicided at the end of the Second World War, they've taken that over and look after it. And you put your name down on special days and it's a money raiser as well. But nearly all of that section is adopted. Not a large, and it's just beautifully maintained with very little cost.
Just one thing on the comment. Sorry, you go.
And when I worked for council, we tried to do that, and we got so much. There was so much resistance from council. The service clubs just threw up their arms and said, "Okay."
Can you explain that one? Resistance in what respect?
Non-cooperation.
No, I understand what resistance could be, but why was there resistance, is my question.
You tell me.
Well, I can't be accountable for everything council's done for the last 100 years.
Yeah,
but
there was a lot, is Brian.
Sure, right. I guess on the comment about burials and multiple uses of a site, I think there's a bit more nuance to it. I don't think we're saying that it's not happening more than it used to, because it certainly is. I've only been at council for 4 years, but in my time here, there's been several examples of it. So it's happening more, but I don't think it was standard practice some time ago. Certainly the feedback from Tao and Forgy is it's becoming more popular, and we've seen a number of sites cleaned up as part of that process, which goes back to what Brian was raising. And I think there is an opportunity from that to progressively improve certain sites. And we're certainly encouraging. I think the CHMP talks about that as an opportunity. So we're not discouraging at all. And as for the honesty thing, I can't speak for whether we've got records which perhaps are flawed and that people you weren't notified. And if that's been the case, I apologise for that. But as I said, we'll talk to you offline in terms of the quality of data and how we can improve it.
Talk about history, and one of the graves, he was third person buried in that cemetery, and then park a car over it.
Conscious of time, I think maybe one final question to stretch the friendship, if there is one final question, because we're 5 past, which is at least half an hour overtime. Any final question? This is your last chance. Otherwise, you can email us, but it sounds like we might have a conversation offline, which may lead to an RSL conversation as well. Maybe that's via Teams. We'll have to work out the right technology and
we do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be
Anything else? Anyone? No, gone. Thank you everyone for tonight. Much appreciated. Any final words from our consultants?
Well, I'd just like to say that what we're trying to do with the master plan is to provide overall guidance to council so that things like routine maintenance, particular issues aren't just treated in a slightly haphazard way, that there's a framework that works toward, hopefully, really enhancing the amenity and the experience for everyone using it. So it gives council a reference point so that when there are issues, that they make sure that the work they're doing is supporting the long-term vision. So what we're trying to get right in the master plan is a vision for how the cemetery should be into the future. And with each of the projects that Tom has described and illustrated up there, they're preliminary concepts. When those projects happen, there'll be a detailed design process and consultation with each of those projects. So this isn't sort of the end game, it's really the starting point to thinking about the future of the cemetery. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.